Hello everyone, my name is Daniel Dracos and I produce content under the name Sifa. If you found this on Twitter, you're probably following me at LawSifa. I appreciate that. Or on Facebook, Daniel Sifa Dracos. So today what I want to talk about in this video is going to be sort of a Thorns Thought style video. After looking at Frostgurn's AMA, this appeared to be one of the types of content that she recommended putting out on a pretty regular basis. And one of the things that I've struggled with in the past is putting out high quality informative content that has very good production value as well, and unfortunately at this point don't quite have the manpower or resources to put out that high production content that I know a lot of people like, such as the level 1 video that Frostgarden and I made on the collab channel. The link will be at the bottom of the screen if you guys haven't already seen it. But what I want to talk about today is priorities and picks and bans, and defining your priorities for your team and building for your team. And the reason I want to talk about this now is watching LPL last night. We saw Snake versus Xiaogu, obviously in the losers bracket, fighting their way to see who would get that world seed, and Snake sort of stumbled through picks and bans, and which has brought me to wanting to have this discussion about what priorities should be in picks and bans. And I'm not going to talk about specific champion picks for Snake, or what Snake should have picked, or what would have been more powerful for a team overall. It's more going to be like general concepts. And so to start us off, I want to talk about an example. So we're going to look at game 2 from Snake. You're going to see the pick and ban on one of the sides of your screen. I'm not sure which side it's going to end up on, but for Snake, the two picks that I want to talk about are Yu on this Ahri and Beast on this Lee Sin. Now, the majority of Snake's team composition is very strong for them. I think, obviously, Ella is a pretty competent Braum player. Martin showed, in this game especially, that he's a pretty great Kog'Maw, and that the team reasonably understands how to run with these picks. The rest of the comp doesn't really build around the Kog'Maw, but I feel like Kog'Maw in a vacuum is still pretty strong. So let's talk about the Lee Sin for Beast. So Beast, obviously a very talented jungler. Part of the reason that Snake was so successful last season was this Beast-Ella synergy and both these players really showing up. But Beast has never been the early pressure jungler. He's never been that early playmaking Lee Sin. He's always sort of been more of the team fighter. And the reason why you can justify this pick for Snake is because historically, when Yu gets ahead on Ahri, Snake almost always wins the game. Yu, obviously a very talented player, can make those picks, can find those advantages for his team, especially when he has a lead and he can effectively duel or take the risk to use the Spirit Dash very aggressively. However, this may have made more sense when Snake wanted to use their substitute jungler. However, because they're using Beast today, all that they've really done is put an immense amount of pressure on Beast to perform on something that he has historically not performed on, and suddenly built a composition that's not entirely reliant on you getting ahead whatsoever, but a composition that historically, a style of composition that historically has been successful when you gets ahead. So we watch the game, we see Beast obviously not performing. He does make a huge effort to provide early pressure, but it's relatively unsuccessful. Some mistakes, some sort of lackluster ganks in the lane, and it's very clear that Beast is not comfortable. And as the game moves forward, Lee Sin quickly becomes relevant after not being a huge factor in the early game either, which is, obviously one of the areas where he is strongest. And despite obviously being on 516 and having that damage buff to the Dragon's Rage, it still doesn't make Lee Sin a great late game scaling pick. Not that Elise picked on the other side is either, but I think it is arguable that she does scale a little bit better, a little bit more pick potential from the Cocoon, at least a little bit more easily accessible pick potential, as opposed to some of those insect style Dragon's Rage plays, which Beast doesn't really make either. So looking at this and looking at the issue here coming into this, I want to define what priorities should have been for Snake, because clearly picking something that your players aren't comfortable on is never ideal, and picking a team composition that works with a different set of players or with a different set of picks isn't ideal either. And so I want to start by defining the priorities in picks and bans. And these are my priorities, and obviously feel free to dispute these and let me know what you guys think. But for me, what a team should always prioritize first is picking a team composition that the team as a whole knows how to play, that a team as a whole knows how to execute with. And for the most part, obviously Snake did that in this pick ban. And then the second priority needs to be picking something comfortable for your players, picks that they individually know how to use, that they individually have had success on in the past, or that they have worked on, practiced, and have really come to understand, right? So individual comfort and also team comfort. So an example of when this is done well, Obviously, there's tons. Xiaogu, even in the same pick ban, do a really good job of picking a composition that they know how to run. A lot of mid-game team fighting strength with both the Victor and the Alistair. A lot of, team fight utility with this Twitch, and, giving up a little bit of their team fight strength to put V on this split pushing duelist top laner just to give them a little bit of a comfort matchup. So they sacrifice a little bit of team strength to give their top laner a bit of a winning matchup, and that's perfectly acceptable because they've still retained a lot of their team fighting identity, but sacrificed a little bit of their team strength for a little bit more individual player comfort. And that's some of the changes you're going to have to make. You're never going to get all 5 of your players perfectly comfortable, all 5 of your players playing exactly what they want to be playing. And if you do, good on you, great pick and ban, good job, but it might not always happen, and you have to be willing to sacrifice things here and there, give up certain weaknesses just to get certain strengths. So looking at when this was done poorly, unfortunately, going to use an example from the LMS, the region that I've had some personal experience casting. So for those of you not familiar with Hong Kong esports, we're going to look at their game versus their first game versus AHQ in the pick ban phase, and we'll pop that pick ban up on your screen. And what you're going to see is very early on is a very split push sort of focused composition from AHQ on your right side, something that they're very comfortable running, something that they've executed in the past. Westor obviously on that signature Diana mid, going to be one of the signature mids. The man has a small champion pool, but an impressive champion pool nonetheless. So we can expect from what we've seen in the past, a split pushing focused Diana, maybe a full AP Diana like we saw in the final week of the regular season against Flash Wolves. But either way, you can be relatively certain that this is not going to be a team fight focused build coming in from Flash Wolves. Much more of a 4-1 split push, much more of a kind of a pick and split apart the opposing team. Now HKE take an interesting strategy here. They pick stuff that's comfortable for their team. You have the Rumble in the top lane for Mei, you have the Morgana for Ole. Even God JJ, a weaker ADC, is looking pretty comfortable on the Corki, Dinter on the Gragas, and Toys on the Jace. And so they've filled out comfort picks for their entire team. Toys of incredibly, I don't know if he would define it as a comfort pick for himself, but the man is an amazing Jace and definitely looks comfortable on it in this game. But the issue is when we see the Corki and we the Jace, we identify that the team is very much poke focused. You have the Gragas for disengage. Rumble and Morgana a little bit different in the identity of the team they want to function or what they want to do on the team, but it's very clear with the Jace and the Corki that this is a poke focused composition, a composition we've seen be popular across the world, a composition that a lot of teams have seen success with and a lot of teams have fallen flat. Unfortunately for HKE, they are going to be one of the teams that fall flat here. Because they don't have experience running these sort of poke compositions. HKE historically, consistently have found success time and time again on team fight focused compositions. At the beginning of the season, obviously with these like ridiculous kind of 5 bruiser comps, but as the season moved forward, they figured out their strength with Victor, with the Sivir, with the Morgana and Rumble still being big picks there. Is Mei kind of a breakout player on the team, has really shown up here. However, despite all this comfort, because they've picked this composition that they haven't historically been able to execute, it's very clear that they're not comfortable identifying their win conditions and when they can and cannot fight. And as a result, they take some poor fights, they get split pushed out, and AHQ eventually wins the game. And so this is the thing, is that it has to be your number one priority should be picking for your team and for your players, but it has to be both of those things. It can't just be one. Because if you pick something that your team knows how to execute with picks your players don't know how to run, it's just not going to work on an individual mechanical level. And if you pick something for your players but doesn't execute in terms of a team composition, then they can win the game. In either cases, they still can win the game, but you're definitely weakening your team for the sake of personal comfort. Now, coming into the second pick, or the second priority. So first, obviously, is picking for your team or your players. So number 2 now is going to be picking something strong within the meta. So obviously, HKE did that with the Corki and with the Jace. Reasonably strong picks within the meta. Rumble in the top lane, always kind of strong. Gragas is a jungler. Yeah, so universally, they got pretty strong picks. The only pick that really stands out is Ole's Morgana, but individual comfort, once again, showing through over something strong within the meta. And there's no absolutes here. Sometimes you're going to have to give up these picks. And a good example of that is, God JJ, not the best Sivir player whatsoever, not really a huge comfort pick for him. Additionally, there's a lot of players that weren't hugely comfortable with Sivir when Sivir really started to become popular. But for those of you who remember this era of like the meme Sivir comp, just anything you could put Sivir in any composition and she'd work, and it was because On the Hunt as a skill was so powerful that individual comfort was fundamentally irrelevant because the character was so strong and so polarizing. And that's one of the times where picking something strong within the meta is going to override personal comfort. And additionally, once again, when you can pick something strong for your team that is a comp that they know how to execute, that is also strong within the meta, you're running your pick ban brilliantly. However, I would still prioritize, once again, depending on the strength of the picks, individual comfort. If it's the difference between Orion and Victor, two, I would say, reasonably comparable team fight oriented sort of control mage style characters, if it comes down to picking those two, especially in recent patches where Victor has seen a number of nerfs rather, I would say always pick whichever one you're more comfortable with, regardless of which one you feel is stronger for your team composition or is stronger within the meta, simply because they both serve very similar roles, but being able to come out even or ahead in lane is a pretty determining factor a lot of the times, and one that people often undervalue. All right, so the third thing that I want to talk about is trying to take something away from your opponents or shutting down their composition. And I've listed this as a third priority in pick bans because, once again, I believe wholeheartedly that you should pick something you're comfortable with, that your team knows how to execute, and try to pick something strong within the meta, pretty much in that order. Now, taking something away from your opponents and shutting down their compositions can be incredibly strong, especially against teams such as HKE, who have sort of identified themselves as one-trick ponies, very Victor and Sivir, very necessary for them to come out and win because of what they allow them to do in team fights. So when teams want to take that away from HKE, I really respect that decision because HKE has not shown a whole lot of depth in pick and bans in terms of champion pool. However, it's not always the case, and it's not always the right choice to prioritize taking something away from your opponents, especially if it means limiting your own composition. And the prime example that I want to talk about here is going to be the NA Finals, CLG versus TSM specifically, and Bjergsen's pickup of Yasuo. Now, most of us have probably seen the set, and for those of you who haven't, Game 1 was absolutely dominating showing from Zion Spartan. They get the Yasuo into Gnar matchup, one of the few matchups where Yasuo is truly considered a counter pick, and incredibly strong simply because of how much blocking the boomerang from Gnar does to Gnar's relative safety, ability to harass, ability to trade, and additionally, in mini Gnar, how few tools Gnar has to deal with Yasuo's aggression and Yasuo's mobility in lane. So Zion Spartan shows up huge, comes through, absolutely a great playmaker for the team, a great split pusher, CLG looking confident. Now coming into game 2 picks and bans, and we'll probably get this pick and ban up on the side of the screen, you can see that TSM very early on once again prioritizes Wild Turtle. Not a great showing from game 1, but I mean still an arguable thing to do coming into game 2 is to prioritize this Kog'Maw for Wild Turtle. Game 3 they do it again, but we won't go into game 3. We'll focus there on game 2, and so you can see Bjergsen picks up the Yasuo for himself, and this is a really interesting choice because Yasuo as a mid laner, personally, I'm not a fan of the pick whatsoever. I think that Yasuo is best as a split pusher, and that his teamfight presence, the teamfight presence that you really need from a mid laner, just isn't there for Yasuo in most circumstances. And so Bjergsen picks this, and we're skeptical, right? Maybe Bjergsen's executed this. Maybe this is a great option to take away this sort of carry style pick from Zion Spartan that Zion has shown that he is more than comfortable on. However, Bjergsen doesn't look comfortable in a game. And when you look at the way that TSM have structured their draft, they're once again not prioritizing Dyrus, which is clearly how CLG won in the first game, was by shutting down Dyrus, by making sure that Dyrus was uncomfortable, which freed up a lot of their pressure. So TSM aren't responding to that. They're instead saying, we're going to take away this carry pick from Zion, and we're going to put more pressure on Bjergsen to be a carry with this Yasuo pick. And unfortunately for Bjergsen, this matchup doesn't look difficult for Pobelter at all. He falls behind in the first few levels, but once he hits around level 4, he's comfortable trading, he's comfortable pushing the wave, and Bjergsen doesn't really get ahead. In fact, in desperate attempts to get ahead, Bjergsen overextends, gets caught out, doesn't really show up in team fights as well, and now it looks like TSM have prioritized taking something away too highly, and as a result are now falling flat on their faces. So because they didn't identify correctly that they needed to put a little bit more priority to keep Dyrus safe, and overvalued the Yasuo pick and taking that Yasuo pick away instead of their individual teamfight strength, suddenly not only have they not really taken anything away from CLG as it turns out, because Zion Spartan is completely comfortable on different picks, but additionally they've crippled their own team in their attempt to take something away. Now, can this be done well? Of course. Teams can take things away all the time. Teams can execute well. Teams can find the right picks to take away to shut down the way a team works, to shut down some players that are considered one-trick ponies, or some picks that have really been polarizing for a specific comp, like a Sivir or maybe the Victor when Victor was truly powerful, or the Azir, right? You can ban those picks away, you can take those picks away from the enemy team, and it can work. However, it's not always going to be successful, and in the case of TSM here, it was not. So, looking at my pick and ban priority one more time as I close out here. First priority for me always has to be individual comfort and team comfort. In no specific order. Sometimes individual comfort will be more important for specific players. Sometimes you're going to be able to build a comp that's functional with 4 pieces and let the 5th piece just be a comfort pick for someone in laning phase, right? Second priority has to be picking something strong within the meta. Picking something, sometimes you're going to be able to make an OP pick that isn't as comfortable for your teammate to play, whether it's that Sivir that's been so powerful, maybe Skarner on live patch, maybe, you know, Darius. I don't know how powerful these picks are going to be. We can only speculate. But if they're as strong as solo queue would indicate, maybe it's worth giving up some personal comfort to pick up these characters and these champions. Third priority, of course, taking away from your opponents or shutting down their comps. Sometimes it's going to be the right choice to take away their characters and shut down their compositions and sacrifice something strong within the meta, sacrifice something for your team and players. But most of the time it will not be the right choice. Most of the time your priority should be to your team and your individual strengths. And if it happens to be that you're taking away something that you're also comfortable with, great. Beautiful way to run a pick ban, beautiful way to execute here. Execute a pick ban strategy. However, most of the time when we see this happen, at least for teams with weaker pick ban, it's not necessarily the case. So looking forward, looking to the future, I hope that teams will identify a pick ban strategy that they are comfortable with. And whether it's kind of what I've outlined here as far as priorities or something different, obviously for a lot of teams it just needs to change because clearly not enough value is being placed on, in my opinion, not enough value is being placed on individual team comfort and player comfort, and strength in the meta is often being over prioritized. And while taking away from your opponents and trying to shut down their compositions isn't something we see as much, it's being prioritized to a certain degree as well. So moving forward, something I hope to see change in pick ban, something I hope that teams can learn from. And that's going to be about it for the video. So if you liked the video, let me know your thoughts. Let me know your thoughts on what should be prioritized in pick bans. Maybe you think that something strong within the meta should always be the priority. Maybe you think that that's how what teams should practice around, what teams should work on. Maybe you have a different thought entirely. Let me know in the comments. Let me know on Twitter. And of course, a huge shout out to Kelsey Moser, who helped talk to me about Snake and Snake's strengths as an individual and provided me with some interesting Snake stats that I didn't really use in the video, but did help develop my opinion, specifically on beasts, on early pressure junglers, and obviously on Use Ahri. I'm looking forward. We'll try to make more videos as we approach Worlds, just with kind of general concept things like this, because pick and ban, one of my favorite things to talk about. So, once again, thanks for watching. This is Sifa, and I'll see you guys next time.